All right. Welcome, everybody, to our Performance for Women series for women's health. This is fueling and training around the menstrual cycle. I'm joined here by Shannon Ehrhardt, who is our Director of Nutrition for Exos. I will let Shannon kind of give her a little backstory, but a fun fact about Shannon is she is a former Intel dietitian. So some of you may know Shannon from a few years ago when she was supporting the Intel population. So we're happy to have Shannon back to support Intel and talk a little bit about fueling and training around the menstrual cycle. So Shannon, I'll let you kind of take it away from here, and you can go ahead and introduce yourself and then get right into it.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Cody. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. As Cody mentioned, my name is Shannon Ehrhardt. I am the Director of Nutrition for Exos. I've been with the company for about 8 years now. And as Cody mentioned, I did actually start with the Intel account back in 2016, I think. So it's always fun to come back and support the Intel population. I'm really excited to be here and kind of present on this topic. It's something that's really gained a lot of traction in the last year or so, but there's been a lot of background research been going on for a while now. So I always like to say, if you are a woman or you know a woman, this presentation is for you. So really it's for anyone, and I'm excited to share this information with y'all today. As a company, we've worked with a lot of experts in the field to create our own stance on how to best support the women that we work with. And the first primary focus point was addressing women in their reproductive years and how specific nutrition and training strategies can be incorporated based on a woman's natural menstrual cycle. So today I'm going to go over some of those specific strategies. And as Cody mentioned, we will have time for questions at the end. So be sure to either write them down or add them to the chat box, and we will get to as many of them as we can. So here we go. So Dr. C.S.S. has been researching women for many years, because there's been a significant gap in the research, and just recently has, finally gained a little traction, like I mentioned, and helping try to normalize this conversation and using the research and learnings to support performance for women. And when we say performance, I mean, performance in work, performance in life, performance in sport. So it's kind of an all-encompassing term. Women have historically been tossed out of research because they were considered, quote unquote, anomalies. This led, to most performance research just being transferred to women, making assumptions that we would just adapt the same as men. So as a company, since 1999, we strive to provide the finest services to our athletes and members like you in order to help y'all maximize the performance, whatever that may be for you. So in an effort to bridge that gap, we started diving into this with the help of Dr. Sims and other experts in the field in order to best serve the women that we work with who trust us with helping them optimize their performance. Women have a superpower, and it is known as the menstrual cycle. The missing gap in research seems to revolve around that menstrual cycle and the fluctuating hormones that go along with that, which has made it challenging to interpret the effects of any intervention in clinical research, and is why they have been largely ignored. So what is being learned from Dr. Sims and other experts in the field is that these sex hormones, they ebb and flow throughout the cycle. And when they are tracked and studied, the menstrual cycle itself becomes an incredibly potent tool, which can be leveraged to women's performance advantages. So I'm really excited to kind of go over some of those things today. I'm going to talk about the menstrual cycle in general, just understanding kind of the basic physiology of it. Then we're going to discuss some of the fueling strategies, how modifying macronutrients during each phase and supplements can help, training modifications, leveraging the cycle to target training to what women are primed for during each phase, And all this in an effort to support recovery, training adaptations, and overall performance. And remember, performance meaning, in work, life, and sport, not just talking about the athlete that needs to go perform at the top level. We all need to perform well in any aspect. So all right, so let's get into the cycle overview and understanding, because understanding this paired with like a woman's own hormone profile is really kind of that first step. And I want to reiterate this many times today. The menstrual cycle itself is actually a very strong health indicator for women, in that, if there is a regular cycle without any other red flags, then everything is functioning as it should be. And I'll kind of discuss a little bit more about what some of those other flags might be in a little bit. But in general, a regular cycle is very important to overall health for women. And I will mention that a few times throughout today, because it's very important to kind of get that across. So the menstrual cycle itself is really broken down into 4 phases. We speak to it kind of in 2 phases, meaning the follicular phase, or the first half of the cycle, and then the luteal phase being the second half of the cycle. But really the 4 phases, menstruation, which is actually that bleed phase, is considered one of the phases. And then the follicular phase, which actually encompasses that menstrual phase, the bleed phase. And then we've got ovulation that happens right before the luteal phase. And then the luteal phase is that second half of the cycle. The average length of a menstrual cycle is about 28 days long. It's going to vary person to person, anywhere between probably 21 to 35 days. And throughout the entire cycle, these certain hormones are fluctuating the entire time. But I'm going to keep it pretty high level today, and we're just going to talk about estrogen and progesterone specifically, because those are the 2 that will kind of play a really important role when we're speaking to nutrition and training strategies. So the follicular phase, that's also referred to as kind of the low hormone phase, because there is a lower level of circulating hormones that is happening during this time. And this phase starts with the onset of bleeding, and it goes up until ovulation. This is the phase that will either shorten or lengthen depending on how long the entire menstrual cycle may be for. So for those who might have a 32-day cycle, the follicular phase will actually last maybe 18 days, whereas the luteal phase is pretty static, and it will stay about 14 days. And then during menstruation, or the bleeding phase, this is when estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest, and is actually when women are most physiologically similar to men from a hormone perspective. And then right before ovulation, this is when estrogen will kind of peak in order to prime the egg for fertilization and implantation. And then once ovulation occurs, women will enter into a luteal phase. This is also known as the high hormone phase. And this is when the body is preparing for the next cycle. This phase, like I said, generally lasts about 14 days and is pretty static. Again, so if a woman's cycle is typically, let's say 21 days, that luteal phase is going to be 14 days, and then the follicular phase is going to shorten and be much shorter in that entire cycle. So this is the phase when progesterone is actually at its highest, and then estrogen starts to climb slightly. And the impact of these hormones might really affect sleep quality, and just women having a harder time recovering in general. So then we have contraceptives, which kind of, throw a whole different kind of loop into that. And so most of this presentation is based around women not taking contraceptives, but it's also important to just kind of address this topic here. And depending on the form of that contraceptive, it can change the hormone fluctuations during the entire cycle. So it may be very different. So some typical ones you might see are just the oral contraceptives, implants, and shots. Those are all going to be more systemic doses. So you're going to get a systemic dose of hormones. And what this does is it stops ovulation. And so women may or may not continue to cycle. Then you've got your IUDs, which are kind of localized doses of hormones. And what this does is it acts to thicken the mucus in the cervix, making it very difficult for sperm to implant the egg. And there are, also non-hormonal options like a copper IUD, which kind of more or less creates a hostile environment for sperm, acts as like a spermicide to kind of prevent implantation. But those are non-hormonal, so you're not getting kind of any sort of exogenous or external dose of hormones that are going to be creating different cycle changes, hormone fluctuations through the body. So, about 50% of women, use some sort of form of birth control. And there is an increasing percentage of women moving more towards an IUD or an implant option. But in general, just understanding that, if there is some sort of birth control being taken, then these sort of strategies may or may not work in that sense. But it's also good to just understand your own hormone profile. All right, so now let's dive into some of the specific fueling strategies, around a normal menstrual cycle. One of the most important things that I really want to address, and is a very common issue, is the fact that many individuals, and I'm speaking both men and women, are undernourished in a sense. So this is especially true among active individuals and those trying to lose weight. Oftentimes women, as well as men, get trapped in this cycle of, if I want to lose weight, I need to exercise more and eat less. And that's not always the case. Usually what happens, and what I've seen with many individuals that I've worked with, is that they start this way. They may lose a few pounds, but then they hit a plateau. And when that happens, what they try to do is, I need to exercise even more and eat even less. And as the cycle continues, hormones can be negatively impacted, resulting in other health issues kind of popping up, specifically like underactive thyroid functions, things like that. So that can be really, really impactful. And so this concept is known as low energy availability, and it results from underfueling and or overtraining, combination of the both, but more often I see it as it just singly like underfueling. And this is probably one of the most common challenges that I've seen when working with people and trying to get them to understand that that it's not always the case. You don't always, if you're trying to actively lose weight, you don't always have to eat less and exercise more. In fact, it's just trying to move more and eating an adequate amount of energy to support the body in order to allow it to work efficiently. Our bodies need a minimum amount of energy every day. And it's not always about calories in versus calories out. And this energy is actually, it helps like the body to do normal physiological functions, like make hormones that are involved with so many other reactions in the body, specifically metabolism. And women, unfortunately, are more sensitive to this than men. So we've heard the term intermittent fasting before, or time restricted eating. Women are more impacted by those strategies than men. And so those are the things that like women should absolutely stay away from. Extremely low carbohydrate diets or your keto type of diets, intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, because hormones can be impacted so much greater than like the men that might be doing something similar. If women are underfueling or just simply not even eating enough carbohydrates, there's a neuropeptide known as kisspeptin, and that can be affected. And that's when hormones become impacted, thyroid function may decline, and then menstrual irregularities can happen. And this is this is what happens when I mean other red flags, right? So menstrual irregularities are a really good indicator of something's not going on right? So a normal menstrual cycle being a good indicator of health. But just because like a woman has a regular cycle, meaning it's consistent. So let's say a woman has a cycle and it happens and it's every 28 days on the dot, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's normal, right? So there are other red flags that can indicate irregularities that should be watched for. And some of those may include heavy bleeding, bleeding through a heavy tampon or a pad within a couple of hours. That's a red flag that something's not working right. Debilitating cramps is another indicator of something not working right. Hair loss can be an indicator of an irregular menstrual cycle. Extreme fatigue, other severe symptoms such as those things, So those can all be other red flags that can kind of tell you that, oh, my energy availability might not be where it is because it's impacting hormones, which is impacting my menstrual cycle. The first week of the cycle or the bleed phase or early follicular phase does not need to be miserable, a miserable time, right? We've heard, PMS and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't have to be a miserable time. So there's lots of strategies that you can do to kind of help support that time. And we'll kind of talk more about that. There is kind of an easy calculation that can be used to make sure that you're consuming the minimum amount of calories needed to stay out of low energy availability. And that would be about 45 calories per kilogram of fat-free body weight or lean mass per day. And then you would add in any sort of exercise calories. So let's say a woman in her 30s weighs about 150 pounds and is about 33% body fat, wanting to get closer to 25%, let's say. Healthy range is somewhere between 21 and 33. So that would be, I did some like preliminary calculations. So that would be 68 kilograms of body weight and about 46 kilograms of fat-free mass, which if you calculate that out, 56 kilograms multiplied by 45 calories per kilogram, that woman needs about 2,000 calories plus any additional exercise calories should be accounted for. So you can imagine that with a lot of those apps that are out there that kind of just put you at like 1,200 calories, that those are just extreme deficits that are not benefiting women in general. And so it's really important to stay out of this low energy availability area to allow your body to work efficiently, minimize any sort of potential like premenstrual symptoms, things like that. Those sorts of things can have a huge impact. And calories in general, making sure that they're coming from good quality calories, making sure that you're having a minimum amount of those in your day to allow your body to work efficiently and get the most out of the workouts that you are doing. Okay. So if we kind of talk about more, the follicular phase, fueling around the follicular phase, which remember, this is the day one, the onset of bleeding up until ovulation. And this is when women are more estrogen dominant, meaning estrogen kind of plays a bigger role, especially during that right before ovulation. And what that means is that the rise in estrogen makes it just a little difficult to tap into our energy stores. And so, having fuel, especially carbohydrates in and around training is extremely important to gain those adaptations for training. So fasted workouts for women is not ideal, right? Women train and function better in a fed state. So it's important to make sure you're going into any workout with at least a small snack, as well as getting in something right afterwards. Fasted workouts just simply are not a good idea for women at all. If you want to get the most out of that workout, you need to go in fueled with lots of energy to make sure you can get through that workout, and then as well as refueling after that workout. This is why that macronutrient ratio within the follicular phase is kind of weighed more towards carbohydrates, because you have a harder time tapping into those stores. So about 50% of total calories coming from carbohydrates. Again, most of that probably being in and around training to support adaptation. General recommendations around hydration are just important in general. Staying hydrated with electrolytes when needed will help support cell function. This is where many functions are actually happening, including creating energy. No matter where you're at, whether you're working out or you're sitting in front of a computer, you're in a meeting, you have to be cognitively aware, all sorts of things. So hydration, of course, is very important. During this phase, there are some supplements that can actually be beneficial, which may include, iron and vitamin C to help increase, which will help decrease the risk for any sort of iron deficiency anemia with the additional blood loss that's happening during the menstrual, the bleed phase. Vitamin D can help support PMS symptoms during menstruation. Plus, vitamin D seems to be really low in a lot of people, especially those who live in the Northern Hemisphere during winter months, things like that. So that can be really beneficial. And vitamin D is linked to all sorts of things, not just PMS symptoms, but a lot of things in general as well. Energy, I think there's some new research around vitamin D being linked to a strong pelvic floor. So that's all really interesting as well. So then we get into the luteal phase. And again, this is the second half of the cycle from ovulation to just before that next bleed phase. And this is when women are more progesterone dominant with a small increase in estrogen again. So progesterone is more catabolic in nature, meaning that it breaks down tissue. So while estrogen isn't necessarily catabolic, but it does also inhibit any sort of muscle building properties as well. So the combination of the two kind of makes it really hard to build muscle, adapt from training and that sort of stuff. So this is why protein becomes really important during this phase, especially again, in and around training. You want to get the most out of that workout and allow your body to work efficiently, making sure that you're supporting with protein around training itself. And then of course, training itself is also catabolic in nature because you're breaking down tissue to rebuild stronger and leaner and that sort of stuff. So layering all these things with the hormones fluctuation can be more catabolic. And so again, very important to make sure that you go into a training session fed and then refueling as soon as you can after, with extra focus on recovery, supporting that with protein afterwards. Women actually need more protein in general across the board, but during this phase specifically, minimum amount of about 30 grams after a training session is a good idea. When it comes to hydration, the progesterone that is increased actually puts women at a slightly higher risk for hyponatremia, which is just the low level of sodium in the blood, and can lead to other health concerns. So in extreme temperatures or just if you're sweating a lot, just being mindful of electrolytes and being added into any sort of beverage or any sort of water. And a good place to kind of start with sodium intake coming from electrolytes is about 300 to 500 milligrams of sodium per liter of water. And then you can adjust it based on how you feel, especially if you're kind of quote unquote one of those salty sweaters. And sodium is not something to be feared in a lot of a lot of information out there is it should be avoided because it causes heart issues and things like that. If you don't already have a heart condition and you're an active individual, you're probably not getting enough electrolytes in general. And so don't be afraid to either add a little salt to your food or have electrolyte supplements to add to your water throughout the day. And this will help a lot. As for supplements in general, magnesium, zinc, omega-3, and tart cherry, the week leading up to the onset of the period, can really help mitigate PMS symptoms, as well as support sleep in general, because during this phase, remember, sleep can be interrupted. Recovery is just a little bit harder during this time. So some of these supplements can kind of help mitigate some of those symptoms, help support your sleep, which we all know is really important in recovering in general. And so these are a few of the supplements that can help during this phase here. All right, so now when we get into kind of some of the training strategies around the menstrual cycle, first, let's just clarify training versus performance. Training is a series of activities done to improve health and performance, where performance is an output of one single event. So if you're just training or working out to be healthy in general, or are you training for a 5K, a 10K, half marathon, or whatever that might be. So I just wanted to clarify, training versus performance here. But all of this information that I'm giving you today, doesn't mean that women can't perform, during their luteal phase or whatever that might be. Women can perform 365 days of the year at any point during their cycle. All of this information is just to kind of give you information about how to leverage the cycle in order to support training so that you can perform at your top level or whatever that might be. World records have been set at all phases of the cycle. And so I just want to make that clear that just because you're in the luteal phase doesn't mean that, you shouldn't, you're not going to perform your best or whatever that might be. Because why do we train, right? We train to get ready for the moments that matter. And training plans are designed to help any individual adapt and prepare to perform the best at any task or event. So when training accommodates the women's menstrual cycle, then that's when, there's just one more tool to support overall performance. So during the follicular phase, remember, again, this is the first half of the cycle, the onset of bleeding up until ovulation. There are lower levels of circulating hormones, if you remember, right? This is when we're most physiologically similar to men, especially during actual menstruation, the bleed phase. So this is when women are actually primed to take on high intensities, lift heavy loads, do sprint intervals, and can push themselves a lot harder, both mentally and physically. This is the time when women respond to training the way that performance research has implied that they can, right? So if you think about it historically, it's always been, actually, I'm going to go to the next slide here because I think I can dive into that, right? So training on your actual period, we're trying to support that move towards normalizing the conversation. Historically, women have been told to take it easy on their period, right? Girls don't want to go to gym class and so on. However, remember, this is the time when we are primed to take on high intensities and can recover much easier during this time. With that said, of course, every woman's experience is unique, and listening to your own body is more important than what may be on paper. But just keeping that in mind, just because we're on our period doesn't necessarily mean that we can't push hard, especially if you're feeling like you can, right? But if you ever think back to a time, when you're working out, let's say you were squatting or deadlifting, and that lift just, happened to feel so much easier than it did the week before. I remember one time I was following an 8-week program that focused on strength, and I had deadlifts one week, and I remember hitting a PR, and it felt so easy compared to the previous week. When I think back, I had actually just started my period that day, and I did that workout, and it felt like it was like a light bulb that went off. It was so interesting to think about. But again, every woman is different. So keeping in mind your own subjective feelings and listening to your body is also important, especially during that bleed phase when symptoms, might make it hard to find the energy to even work out. But it's just good to kind of keep that stuff in mind. So then we go move into the luteal phase, and remember, this is when women are more progesterone dominant, that catabolic hormone, and it can affect restorative sleep stages. So recovery is extremely important here. This is when it might be a good idea to focus more on lower weights, more reps, less rest in between sets. Energy systems development, more steady state, long duration type of cardio, going for a run or a long walk, keeping that heart rate more stable, and, prioritizing more mobility, stretching, more technical development, things like that, and focusing more on recovery. Now, this also doesn't mean that you can't do a high intensity workout during this phase, just like in the follicular phase. If you're feeling good and you want to do a higher intensity type of session, like do that by all means. Just understand that your body may need more time to properly recover. So again, subjective feelings should be taken into account as well. It just might be harder to kind of hit high intensity sessions like multiple days in a row. You might feel those effects, and you might not adapt to those training sessions as well as you could if you just took some extra rest in between those sessions. Okay, and then again, training with birth control, just something I want to briefly discuss here. So oral contraceptives taken to stop ovulation, as you remember, so there's no egg to fertilize. A woman is not naturally cycling in this case. So most strategies we've kind of discussed won't necessarily work. However, with the pill, the woman is getting a small dose of progesterone every day. So remember that one, progesterone is more catabolic. So the pill can actually be taken opposite of training. So if a woman is working out in the morning, they could take their pill in the evening and kind of get more out of that workout in the morning, because you're hitting kind of that tail end of the progesterone bump. And so there's ways to kind of like at least get adaptations, better adaptations out of that workout, if you kind of opposite the oral contraceptive with your training session. And so that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Copper IUDs, which again is non-hormonal, and remember creates kind of more of a hostile environment, but can also create a lot of localized inflammation, and is why kind of periods may be worse for a couple of months after that may be implanted. So with that though, because it's non-hormonal, a woman may continue to naturally cycle. And so a lot of these strategies will also work with that sort of contraceptive. And then hormonal IUDs, implants, shots, this effect on performance is really kind of somewhat unclear right now. There's more research that needs to be kind of looked at there. But it is the IUD specifically is more localized. And so with that, there may be more of a regular cycle, or not as impacted as much systemically from the hormones. With any of these, the period may or may not stop. But regardless, it's important to kind of track the cycle and symptoms for a better understanding of your own personal experience. And then just kind of, some of the key takeaways to kind of wrap up a little bit here. We've touched on a lot, but it was really just the surface. But some of the key takeaways, again, reiterating, avoiding that low energy availability. Remember, this is so important in allowing the body to work efficiently. And if you want to get the results that you're looking for, having the energy in order to do that will help you better recover, will help your body work more efficiently, and actually, you'll start to see the results that you're wanting to. I know I've worked with many clients, and when I can finally get them to connect those dots of like, oh, I don't have to eat less, I actually need to eat more. And then they start actually, they have more energy, they feel a lot better. And then the side effect is really just the weight is just starts coming off. And so energy availability is extremely important, from just making sure everything is working properly. Cycle tracking can really help women better understand their own hormone profile, and symptoms that go along with it. Nutrition in general, adjusting macronutrient distribution based on what phase you're in, can support energy, can support recovery and overall adaptations to your training or the workouts that you're doing. Prioritizing sleep hygiene throughout the luteal phase. I know y'all have heard a lot about how we push sleep hygiene from an Exos perspective. But it is so extremely important, especially during that luteal phase, in order to help support recovery when the body is just having a harder time doing it. So any way we can support it a little bit more is going to be beneficial. And then finally, training, save those high intensity lifting, sprinting sessions for the follicular phase when the body is primed and ready to handle those workouts a little bit better. If you're feeling good in the luteal phase and you want to hit those types of sessions, just know that you may need a little bit more time to recover from those hard workouts. And then just kind of a quick overview of breakdown of the phases. The low hormone phase or the follicular phase, the first half of the cycle, higher carbohydrate intake, basic hydration strategies, iron, vitamin C, higher intensities, higher speed, sprints, things like that, lower volume. And then the luteal phase, or the high hormone phase, second half of the cycle, more protein, take the morning, focus on hydration here, electrolytes if needed, some of the supplementation, omega-3, zinc, tart cherry, magnesium, a week before the menstrual phase, the menstruation phase, and then more focus on lower intensity, long duration, endurance type of sessions here, and you can do a little bit higher volume there. And then sleep may be impacted again. So focusing on sleep hygiene here is going to be important. And then I just wanted to kind of give you some additional resources in case you wanted to learn more. Dr. Stacey Sims, a leader in this field, has a website where she offers courses, has a blog with various articles that are easy to digest on different topics. She's also written 2 really great books. Both are excellent, easy reads, and a lot of really great takeaways. Roar is more around the reproductive age, menstrual cycle that we've kind of covered here. And then Next Level is targeted more towards that transition through menopause and how to optimize that there. Podcasts, one of my favorites is, Hit Play Not Pause. And again, it was the host is actually the woman who helped Dr. Sims write both her books. And this podcast brings in experts who discuss more topics, mostly around menopause, but they have some other experts that they bring in as well. So it's really great if you like podcasts. And then cycle tracking, again, is really important. There's a really great cycle tracking app called wild.ai. And it'll give you kind of nutrition and training, tips based on what phase of the cycle you're in. And there's also short educational videos in there going over what's happening during the phase that you might be in, and that sort of stuff there. So some additional resources that might be interesting for you to kind of, look into or check out. Dr. Sims actually just posted a new blog, and I think it's around energy availability in general. So it would be a good one to kind of check out. So But that is kind of all I have for y'all. We've got about 10-15 minutes for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing and come on the big screen.
All right.
So,
Well, thank you very much, Shannon. That is quite the wealth of information that you shared. So, yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put those into the chat, and we'll get those addressed. There's a couple that are going that we already have here. One is, and I kind of know the answer to this, but I want to get your feedback on this, Shannon. But when you're talking about calories needed when training, you mentioned the 45 calories per kilogram of your fat-free mass is kind of getting your total caloric intake. Where do you want to put the carb ratio within that? What kind of a breakdown of carbohydrates do we want for that?
Yeah, so depending on what phase of the cycle a woman might be in, so if we're in the follicular phase, that first half of the phase, 50% of your calories should be coming from carbohydrates. And again, they would be probably more useful in and around training. So coming into your training session with good amount of carbohydrates, refueling after, pairing that with protein. Protein's great across the entire cycle. It just increases a little bit more in the luteal phase, but carbohydrates, 50% of total intake coming from carbohydrates, and then more 40% in the luteal phase coming from carbohydrates, where just to allow for a little bit more protein to be focused on in that sense. So protein 30% versus 25% in the follicular phase. So there's a slight increase or slight adjustment there from those. But again, everyone's different. And so just keeping in mind, those are general recommendations. And so some people, especially if you're an endurance athlete or an endurance, just like endurance type of, activities, you might need even more carbohydrates than that in general. And the calculation is just a base, just a reminder, that's a base level. So any additional activity you do on top of that should be accounted for to keep you out of that low energy availability.
Yeah. And just remember, carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram of carbohydrates. So you're talking like 250 grams of carbohydrates to get kind of that 50% of your 2,000 calories per day.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it may be overwhelming for somebody to think about like, oh, I need 2,000 calories or I need 2,200 calories if I do a 200 calorie like workout. Whereas and in the past, I've always been, following a 1,500 calorie diet, like just as a key takeaway, I guess, with that is don't jump from 1,500 calories if you've been doing that up to 2,200 like overnight. Slowly work your way up to that, because then it will be less of a shock to the body. Your body will kind of work more efficiently, adjusting as you kind of increase those calories a little bit there. So
okay. You mentioned magnesium, and I know we had Dr. Chris Bertram present in February on sleep, and he mentioned magnesium as well from a sleep standpoint. But are there any types? I know there's a half dozen different types of magnesium supplements on the market. Are there any specific magnesium, I guess, I don't know, option that you would recommend?
Yeah, there's lots of different ones for sleep and recovery in general. I like magnesium bisglycinate or glycinate. It's the same form. Sometimes they put the bis in front of it, but that's kind of my favorite. It doesn't cause any digestive stress. It's better absorbed, and it really helps with kind of the sleep and recovery aspect. Whereas there are other ones that will that are more for cognitive support or other forms, but in general those are good. You can also take Epsom salt baths where you're absorbing the magnesium through your skin, things like that. But there's about 250 to 300 milligrams of a magnesium supplement, a powder, every night, week before the menstruation or bleed phase can really help with sleep recovery, and mitigating any potential like symptoms that you may experience during that actual like menstruation phase.
Okay. We have a question here about training during pregnancy. Any advice that you have within that time frame?
Yeah, that's another topic that we're working on right now. We're kind of working through phases. Menopause was one that we tackled. We're working on pregnancy here right now. And so there's a lot of misconceptions around pregnancy as well. And it's my understanding that, there are certain things that you shouldn't do. But in general, it's good to exercise during pregnancy. It depends on what you're used to, what you've done in the past. And so it depends. I don't have any like real great takeaways for that, but it is good to exercise during pregnancy. It's good for the baby, it's good for you. And you don't need to like take it easy or just go for walks or things like that. There's a lot of really good stuff focusing on like the pelvic floor and things like that are really good. So if you're an endurance athlete and you're used to running miles, like that doesn't mean that you have to stop running altogether, right? I know that one of the myths out there is you can't, lift more than 20 pounds and you shouldn't go running or something like that. But if that's something that you've been doing as part of your training strategies, then it absolutely is something that you can keep doing. You just might not be able to keep up the same pace, and especially as you get further into pregnancy. But
yeah, as a coach, I would say that yes, throughout the 3 trimesters, like you're going to have different guidelines for exercise. As you get into the 3rd trimester, like anything from a supine, anything laying on your back is going to be something that you want to avoid. But doing some body weight squats, walking up and down the stairs, going for hill walks, those types of things are certainly acceptable even as you get into the 3rd trimester. I would encourage someone you're not going to improve your fitness while pregnant, but you can maintain your fitness.
Yeah.
So if you're prior to getting pregnant, if you're developing your fitness, you're building some strength, you're building some endurance, like you're able to carry that endurance throughout the pregnancy by staying active. So again, just kind of recommending those daily habits to make sure that you're constantly moving, and obviously working with your doctors and whatnot to provide those specific recommendations when it comes to the 3 trimesters and what you can and cannot do within those trimesters.
I know a common myth as well, like as we've been diving into the research, is like like making sure that your heart rate stays below like 140 or something. And of course there are certain considerations, like if you are carrying twins or anything like that, like yes, but if it's a single pregnancy, those sorts of things like aren't necessarily, like you don't have to make sure that you keep your heart rate low. Like having a nice like fluctuation of your heart rate is actually good for the baby, good for you, things like that. So we're diving more into that stuff, and hopefully we'll have some really good stuff this year sometime. So
yeah, that's good to hear. Let's see here. So if you're on a hormonal IUD, how can you determine where you're at in your cycle for follicular phase or luteal phase if you're on that hormonal IUD?
Yeah. I would start like tracking any symptoms. Would be a good place to kind of start. So like, are there weeks or days that you're more fatigued, or your sleep, like if you're wearing like a Oura ring or a Whoop band, like do you have a harder time like recovering? Just kind of tracking that and trying to kind of figure out exactly maybe where you are. If it's a hormonal IUD, you're getting, that external like hormones, and so that can be affecting you. But really the biggest thing with this is just understanding your symptoms in your own hormone profile, in order then to kind of match how you want to train with that. So you may not be having a regular cycle, but if there are weeks, like 1 week, like you're really like tanking, like it's really hard to even find motivation to work out or things like that, then maybe that's the week that you focus on recovery and just trying to move a little bit. You don't have to like, feel guilty about not getting into the gym and getting a good workout in, but maybe you're focusing like more strategies in that sense, as opposed to like, here's my 28-day cycle. And this is what I need to do here, here, and here, but really focusing more on like your symptoms and your own personal experience and how you're kind of affected in that sense.
All right. I think we'll end with this last question. There's two on here that are very similar. Um, Fatigue, tiredness, maybe even some low back pain, low energy. Any tips, any strategies on ways to kind of work through the menstrual cycle when you have tiredness, when you have fatigue, when you just don't feel like you want to go and train, you want to go and work out? Any suggestions there?
Yeah. Yeah, so if that's happening, during the actual like bleed phase, some of those supplements that I talked about, tart cherry, magnesium, omega-3, zinc, those can actually help potentially mitigate some of those symptoms during that bleed phase. So you might, energy might be a little bit better. You might not have as much back pain. So those are things that you could potentially start if you are having that time, having a hard time like with fatigue and things like that. During that bleed phase, when we say, oh, this is when you should hit high intensities, things like that, this is really important to take into account your own subjective data. So if you don't have the energy to go, you hit something, high intensity type of session, just because that's what, the guidelines say that you should do, doesn't mean that that's what you have to do. So if you're feeling, fatigued, then, some light yoga or light stretching, just like go for a walk, like whatever you can do to kind of just move your body, and that's okay. And then the day that you are starting to feel better, I mean, you're still in that follicular phase where you can hit high intensities. And like I said, there are some women, like maybe that first half of the luteal phase, they're still feeling really good and they can hit high intensities and they can recover just fine, right? So again, it's going to be very like using subjective data as well, how you're feeling, your own personal experience, and matching that with where you go. We just did kind of an internal study where we ran this kind of strategy with 15 women, and on the week of their period, they got to choose which type of workout they wanted to do based on how they felt. And then some of the takeaways that they got was like, oh, I've learned that like that first week of like during the bleed phase, and the last week is when I personally need to focus more on recovery, but the 2 weeks in the middle is when I feel the best. So again, like it's just going to depend on like your own symptoms and things like that as well. These are just kind of general guidelines and what's happening physiologically and how we can leverage the menstrual cycle to support training adaptations. So
Yeah. And remember, this is a lifelong journey, so if you
mhm.
have to miss one training day because you're tired and not feeling it,
Yeah,
that's a drop in the bucket compared to all the other successful training sessions that you can have over the coming weeks, months, years to follow. So
absolutely.
I'm going to put a link in the chat because there's a couple questions around nutrition. Somebody's asking about getting protein. Someone else is asking about dietary fat and the roles that those play. So I want to drop in our group nutrition webinar series. So this is a link to Meetup where we have several Intel Vitality group nutrition sessions. There's some sessions coming up around creative cooking with plant-based proteins. We have a make ahead high protein breakfast coming up. We also have a get creative with carbs. So some of the things that we've talked about around getting carbohydrates, getting some energy, making sure you're fueling with proteins. These sessions are available in our group nutrition webinar. So I encourage you guys to check out those sessions as well. And certainly would encourage you, if you have some more specific questions, to schedule a one-on-one consultation with an Intel Vitality Program dietitian. They'd be happy to walk you through a little bit of a game plan and a strategy and how you can eat and fuel for your own kind of personal situation, and give you some ideas for getting some of those protein, carbs, and fats into your diet. So please feel free to check out those sessions. I will share this recording with everyone after this so that you have a copy of it. We will do another one tomorrow at 7 p.m. Pacific time. So feel free to, again, come back if there's something that you missed, or if you had a question that you want to ask, you can come back tomorrow, or forward this on to a friend. And we thank you all for joining us. Shannon, thank you very much for your time and for your valuable information. I appreciate everyone for joining, and we're here to celebrate women's health, and we're going to continue all month long to talk about women's health, both training, fueling, recovery strategies as well. So look forward to more to come from the Incel Vitality Program. And with that, thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate the time, and hope everyone has a great rest of your Monday.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.
Bye.
Bye.